Sir, please don't sign that. There's something wrong with it. Annie's voice broke the air between them, sharp with panic, too small for the words it carried. She stood directly in his path, her face pale, eyes wide, both hands shaking as she held the folder out in front of her. The papers inside rattled softly, betraying how badly her fingers trembled. The billionaire stopped short. He blinked once, then again, fast, the way a man did when something unexpected forced its way into his carefully ordered day. "What?" he said, not unkindly, but distracted. His phone was still in his hand, the tail end of a call buzzing against his palm. "What are you doing here?" Annie swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, like she was trying not to cry and failing anyway. "The file," she said. "The one you forgot this morning. It's not right." He glanced down at the folder. Recognition flickered across his face. Of course. The signing package. His assistant must have left it on the desk earlier. He'd told her he would deal with it later. He always did. "That's business paperwork," he said, already half turning away. "You shouldn't be touching it." "I know," Annie said quickly. "I know I shouldn't, but I was cleaning, and it fell, and I saw inside, and..." Her words tumbled over each other. "Sir, it looks like if you sign it, you lose everything." That made him pause. He looked at her properly this time. Not just a passing glance, but a full look. The cleaning uniform swallowed her small frame. Her sneakers were worn thin. She couldn't have been older than 6. "Lose everything?" he repeated, a faint smile tugging at his mouth despite himself. "Who told you that?" "No one," Annie said. "I read it." The smile faded, replaced by mild amusement edged with impatience. "You read it," he echoed. "You don't even know what it says." "I can't." "I know enough," she insisted, stepping closer. "It says you'd be the only one responsible. All of it. If something goes wrong, it's on you. They don't share it." He sighed, the sound of a man accustomed to managing interruptions. "Sweetheart," he said, softening his tone. "These documents are written by lawyers. They look scary if you don't understand them." Annie shook her head, harder now. "It's not just scary. It's like a trick. It looks normal, but it isn't. We have the Clastons to do them." He reached out and took the folder from her hand, a little more firmly than necessary. The papers stilled once they were no longer shaking in her grip. "That's enough," he said. "Thank you for returning it. You did the right thing." He turned toward his desk. Annie didn't move. "Sir," she said again, louder this time. "Please." He stopped, irritation flickering across his face. He had a schedule, a meeting to prepare for, 2 days until a deal that would define the next phase of his company. "What is it now?" he asked. "If you sign it like that," Annie said, her voice cracking, "you don't just lose money. You could go to jail." That got his attention. He laughed once, short and disbelieving. "That's not how this works." She shook her head again, tears finally gathering at the corners of her eyes. "It says criminal. I saw the word. And it says you're the only one. No one else gets blamed." He opened the folder, flipping it open with practiced ease. His eyes skimmed the first page, then the second, scanning the structure, the familiar language, the reassuring formatting. Everything looked exactly as it should. He closed it. "You're mistaken," he said, placing it on the desk. "This is standard." Annie stared at him, disbelief replacing fear. "No," she whispered. "Please. You didn't really read it." Ericst, "I've read contracts my entire life," he said, a hint of edge creeping into his voice. "I know what I'm doing." She stepped closer to the desk, hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You looked fast," she said. "You have to read it slow." "Again," he frowned. "Annie, is it?" She nodded. "Annie," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I appreciate your concern, but this is adult business." "I know I'm little," she said, tears finally slipping free. "But my mom says bad things hide in quiet places. This is quiet." Please read it again. Something about the way she said it made his chest tighten. Not the logic, the certainty. He glanced at the folder again, then at her face. She wasn't acting. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was terrified, and she believed with everything she had that he was about to make a terrible mistake. He picked up the folder again. One more look, he muttered, more to himself than to her. This time, he sat down. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and opened the folder fully. He forced himself to slow down, to ignore the impulse to skim. He read line by line, letting the language settle instead of sliding past it. Annie stood perfectly still, watching his eyes move. Halfway through, his brow furrowed. He went back, rereading a paragraph, then another. His breathing changed, shallow and controlled. He reached the section she'd tried to explain, the one buried beneath neutral phrasing and legal polish. Sole responsibility of the signing party. No indemnification. No shared liability. He felt a cold wave move through him. He read it again and again. The room went very quiet. Annie didn't speak. She didn't need to. She could see it on his face now, the moment when disbelief gave way to understanding. He set the folder down slowly, as if it might explode. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked at her. "You were right," he said quietly. Annie's shoulders sagged with relief, like she had been holding up something far too heavy for far too long. "You saved me," he added, the words sounding strange even to his own ears. Annie nodded once, small and exhausted. "I just didn't want you to sign it." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the folder as if seeing it for the first time. If she hadn't stopped him, if he had done what he always did, trusted the system, trusted the surface, everything he'd built could have vanished with a single signature. He looked at the little girl standing in front of him,
Read it again.
hands still trembling, eyes still wet. And for the first time that day, he understood just how close he had come to losing everything, saved only because a frightened 6-year-old refused to stop saying, "Please read it again." The room stayed quiet long after Annie's warning had landed. The billionaire remained seated, his hands resting flat on the desk, the folder lying between them like something alive that might move if no one watched it closely enough. His breathing had slowed, but his thoughts hadn't. They moved fast now, retracing steps, replaying assumptions, testing how close he had come to signing without a second thought. Annie stood where she was, unsure what came next. Her legs felt weak. The shaking in her hands had finally eased, replaced by a heavy tiredness that pressed down on her shoulders. She had done what she came to do. That was all she knew. "Annie," he said again, testing the sound of her name. "Where's your mother?" The question startled her. She's cleaning," Annie said, pointing vaguely toward the hallway. "She told me not to bother you." He nodded once, as if that explained more than it needed to. "You didn't bother me," he said. Then, after a pause, "You protected me." The words hung there, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. He stood up slowly, careful not to rush, as though sudden movement might undo the fragile clarity of the moment. He walked to the office door and opened it, scanning the hallway. "Rose?" he called, his voice carrying just enough authority to stop anyone who heard it. Footsteps approached. Annie's mother appeared, eyes wide the instant she saw her daughter standing alone with the CEO. Fear flashed across her face, quick and practiced. "I'm so sorry," Rose said immediately. She didn't mean to Annie. "Come here right now." "It's all right," he interrupted. Rose froze. He held up a hand, palm outward, a calming gesture. "Please," he said. "Just a moment." Rose hesitated, then stepped closer, her posture stiff, ready for reprimand. She placed a hand lightly on Annie's shoulder, grounding herself as much as her daughter. "Your daughter did something very important," he said. Rose blinked. I don't understand." Annie looked up at her mother, eyes searching. "I told him," she said softly, "about the papers." Rose's heart dropped. "Annie, she did exactly what she should have done," he said firmly. He turned back toward the desk, picked up the folder, and held it up. "This document was designed to make me legally responsible for decisions I didn't authorize," he said. "If I had signed it, I could have lost everything. My company, my freedom." Rose's face drained of color. I would have signed it, he continued, without hesitation, because it looked routine, because I trusted that it had been handled correctly. He looked at Annie again. She didn't. Annie shifted her weight, suddenly embarrassed. It just felt bad, she murmured. He crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to her eye level again. Do you know how many people work in this building? He asked. Annie shrugged. A lot. Thousands, he said. And you noticed something none of them did. Rose swallowed hard. Sir, she said, voice unsteady. I'm so sorry if she crossed a line. I should have kept her closer. He shook his head. You raised a child who pays attention, he said. That's not something to apologize for. He straightened and turned toward his desk phone. I need my legal team, he said, his voice shifting back into the controlled precision of command. Immediately. He paused, then added, and security. Quietly. Oh, Rose stiffened again, panic rising. Annie felt it through the hand still resting on her shoulder. This isn't about punishment, he said, reading their fear. It's about finding out who put this in front of me. He looked at Rose. Your shift isn't over yet, is it? She shook her head. No, sir. Take the rest of the night off, he said. Both of you. Rose stared. Sir, I can't. You can, he said gently. And you will. Ark. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a card, scribbling something on the back. If anyone asks, you were instructed to leave. He handed it to her. Rose took it with trembling fingers. Thank you, she whispered, unsure what else to say. As they turned to leave, Annie glanced back at the desk, at the folder that had nearly changed everything. She felt smaller now, the rush of urgency replaced by the quiet after. Annie, he said. She stopped. You did the right thing, he said again, slower this time. Even when it was uncomfortable, even when no one asked you to. Annie nodded. Okay. They left the office together, mother and daughter walking down the hallway toward the elevators. Rose didn't speak until the doors closed behind them. Why didn't you tell me? She asked softly. I didn't know how, Annie said. I just knew I had to tell him. It's mine. Rose exhaled shakily and pulled her daughter into a hug, holding her longer than usual. You scared me, she said, but I'm proud of you. Annie leaned into her, exhaustion finally winning. Back upstairs, the billionaire stood alone again, the folder locked away, his phone lighting up with incoming messages. Lawyers, executives, questions forming faster than answers. He looked at the desk where Annie had stood, so certain in her fear, so unwilling to be dismissed. For the first time in years, he understood how close he had come to ruin, not because of greed or ambition, but because of trust placed too easily in the wrong hands. And he understood something else too. Danger didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived neatly bound, smiling, waiting for a signature. Sometimes the only warning came from a child brave enough to say, please read it again. If this story moved you even for a moment, please take a second to show your support. Tap like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and tell us where you are watching from. And if you believe quiet courage and hidden truth still matter, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. The investigation began without an announcement. That was the first thing Annie noticed the next afternoon when she returned with her mother to the building. The lobby looked the same, polished floors, quiet music, security guards nodding to familiar faces, but something underneath had shifted. People moved differently. Voices were lower. Conversations stopped when someone unexpected walked by. Annie didn't know the word for it, but she felt it. The billionaire had kept his word. Rose's job was untouched. No one scolded Annie, no one pulled her aside. Instead, badges were scanned more often. Doors that were usually open stayed closed, and unfamiliar men in dark suits appeared on floors where Annie had never seen them before. They're lawyers, Rose whispered as they waited for the elevator. Or auditors, maybe both. Annie nodded, even though she wasn't sure what either meant. She just knew they weren't cleaning staff. They walked like people who believed the building owed them answers. That night, Rose worked slowly. Too slowly. Her hands shook when she wiped glass. her thoughts circling the same fear again and again. She had spent her whole adult life learning how to stay unnoticed, how to survive by blending in. Now her daughter had done the opposite. Annie sat in her usual spot, legs swinging gently, watching people pass. She wondered if she had broken something. Grown-ups didn't like it when things broke. An hour into the shift, a man she didn't recognize approached them. He wore a gray suit and a badge clipped to his belt. Not the kind that opened doors, but the kind that closed conversations. "Rose Johnson?" he asked. Rose stiffened. "Yes. I'm with internal compliance," he said. "I need to ask you and your daughter a few questions." Annie felt her mother's hand tighten around hers. "It's all right," the man said, quickly. "This isn't disciplinary." Those words meant nothing to Annie, but they meant something to her mother. Rose nodded once. They were led into a small conference room, not the grand kind upstairs, but a quiet one with neutral walls and a pot of coffee that had clearly been sitting too long. The billionaire was already there. He stood when they entered. Rose stopped short. "Sir, please," he said. "Sit." Annie climbed into a chair, feet dangling. The room smelled like paper and stress. "I want to understand exactly what happened yesterday," he said, looking at Annie. "Not in legal language. In yours." Annie frowned. I saw it." "Saw what?" "That it wasn't nice," she said after a moment. "It was pretending." The men around the table exchanged looks. "Pretending how?" one of them asked gently. "It looked safe," Annie said, choosing her words carefully. "But it wasn't. Like when someone smiles but they're mad." The billionaire leaned back slightly, eyes on her. "Did anyone tell you to look at the folder?" Annie shook her head. "Did anyone ask you to bring it to me?" "No." "Did you understand what it said?" She hesitated. "Not all of it. Just the bad parts." "What made you keep reading?" Annie thought about that. "Because my mom says if something makes your stomach feel funny, you shouldn't ignore it." Rose swallowed. The billionaire nodded slowly. "That's good advice." The questions continued, careful and precise. They asked Annie to describe where the folder was, how long it had been there, what pages she remembered. She answered as best she could, growing tired halfway through but pushing on anyway. Finally, one of the men closed his notebook. "That's all we need," he said. For now, as they stood to leave, the billionaire spoke again. "Annie," he said, "do you know why I asked all this?" She shrugged. "Because someone wanted me to sign that document," he said, "and they hoped I wouldn't look closely." Annie's brow furrowed. Why would someone do that? He considered the question carefully. "Because sometimes people believe power makes you careless," he said. "And sometimes they're right." That night, Annie dreamed of paper. Endless paper. Papers that smiled. Papers that whispered. Papers that tried to hide sharp edges behind neat words. She woke before dawn, heart racing, and padded into the kitchen where her mother sat at the table, staring at nothing. "Mom?" Annie asked. Rose looked up quickly. "Did I wake you?" "No," Annie said. "Are we in trouble?" Rose hesitated. Honesty won. "I don't know," she said. "But I don't think you did anything wrong." Annie climbed into her mother's lap, small arms wrapping around her waist. "I didn't mean to cause problems." Rose held her tight. "You didn't cause them," she said. "You found them." The next day, the building buzzed. Emails went out. Meetings were postponed. The deal everyone had been whispering about was officially delayed. People speculated. Rumors grew teeth. By afternoon, the billionaire called Annie and her mother back upstairs. This time, the office felt different. Not calmer, sharper. "We found it," he said once they were seated. "Found what?" Annie asked. "The change," he replied. "The one hidden in the document. It wasn't there in the original draft." Rose's breath caught. "So someone," "Yes," he said. "Someone altered it." Quietly, carefully, he looked at Annie. "If you hadn't stopped me, I would have signed." Annie's fingers curled into her sleeve. "Would you have gone to jail?" He nodded. "Eventually." She went quiet at that. "There's something else," he said. The person responsible didn't expect anyone outside the executive team to ever touch that file. Annie looked up. "Because I'm little? Because you're invisible," he said gently. Rose bristled. Annie didn't. "That's not your fault," he added quickly. "It's a failure of the way people think." He slid a small envelope across the desk toward Rose. "This is for you," he said. "Paid leave. And assistance, if you want it." Rose stared at it. "Sir, I don't want— This isn't charity," he said. "It's responsibility." He turned to Annie. "And this is for you." He placed a different envelope on the desk. Inside was a simple note, handwritten. "Thank you for insisting I read it again." Annie traced the words with her finger. "You're welcome," she said softly. As they left, Annie felt something new settle inside her. Not pride, not fear, understanding. Sometimes grown-ups missed things. Sometimes systems failed. And sometimes, even when you were small and scared, your voice mattered if you used it enough times. That night, as Annie fell asleep, she thought about the moment he had finally listened, about how close everything had come to breaking, and she wondered, for the first time, how many other things in the world were waiting for anyone to say, "Please, read it again." The first person to disappear was the assistant who had delivered the folder. Annie noticed it before anyone said the words out loud. Her badge beeped at the security gate the next evening. The same dull sound as always. But the desk beyond it looked different. A chair was missing. A computer monitor sat dark and unplugged. The neat stack of planners that usually lived on the corner of the counter had been cleared away. "Where's Melissa?" Annie asked quietly. Tugging on her mother's sleeve, Rose followed her gaze. Her mouth tightened. "Transferred," she said after a moment. "That's what they say when someone leaves quickly." "Did she do something bad?" Annie asked. Rose hesitated. "I don't know," she said. "But when people leave like that, it usually means someone wants the questions to stop." The building felt heavier that night. Not louder, not chaotic, just tense, like a held breath that refused to release. Men and women in suits moved in pairs now. Doors closed more often than they opened. The cleaning crew worked around unfamiliar faces, who watched too closely and spoke too carefully. Annie wiped a glass wall and saw herself reflected back, small and dark against the vastness of corporate space. For the first time since she'd spoken up, she wondered if being seen had been a mistake. She didn't voice the thought. The billionaire hadn't called her again, not yet. She told herself that was a good thing. Grown-ups fixed problems quietly. That was how it was supposed to work, but quiet didn't mean safe. Later that evening, Rose was asked to clean a different floor. Not the executive level, lower, closer to operations. She didn't like it. Changes without explanation never meant nothing. Annie followed, sitting near the wall while her mother worked. She listened to voices echo down the hallway, snippets of conversations that floated past without context. Metadata doesn't lie. Someone rerouted approval. I will. Legal exposure was intentional. Annie didn't know what most of the words meant, but she knew the tone. It was the same tone teachers used when something serious had happened at school, the kind that made adults forget children were listening. A man stopped near her, bending slightly as if to tie his shoe. "You're Annie, right?" he asked softly. Annie's heart jumped. She nodded. "I'm Mark," he said. "I work with the compliance team." She looked toward her mother instinctively. "It's all right," he said quickly. "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" Annie asked. "For noticing," he said. "Most people don't." He straightened and walked away before she could ask anything else. Annie sat with that for a long time. The next morning, the news spread without ever reaching the news. The deal had been delayed indefinitely. Emails circulated with neutral language, full of phrases like pending review and internal assessment. No blame, no explanation, but the building reacted anyway. People whispered in break rooms. Someone cried quietly in a stairwell. Another person laughed too loudly at nothing. That afternoon, the billionaire called Rose directly. "I'd like to speak with you and Annie," he said. Today, Rose's hands shook as she hung up. "We're going upstairs," she told Annie. Annie nodded, stomach tightening. The office looked the same. That was the strange part. Same desk, same view, same quiet, but the man behind it looked different. Older, somehow. More careful. Sit, he said. They did. We've confirmed the document was altered, he said without preamble. The changes were subtle, designed to look like routine revisions. Who did it? Annie asked before she could stop herself. He smiled faintly. You're direct. She shrugged. I just want to know. So do I, he said. That's the problem. He folded his hands. The changes came from inside, he continued. Someone with access, someone trusted. Rose inhaled sharply. That's why this is difficult, he said. And why your daughter matters. Annie looked at him, confused. The person who altered the document assumed no one outside a very small circle would ever see it, he said. They counted on hierarchy, on habit, on the idea that people like you, he gestured gently toward Annie and Rose, don't touch important things. Rose stiffened. That assumption nearly cost me everything, he said, and it may cost them much more. Annie's fingers curled into the fabric of her mother's sleeve. Am I in trouble? She asked quietly. No, he said immediately. You're the reason this didn't become a disaster. She studied his face. He looked sincere. But sincerity didn't always stop consequences. Annie, he said, leaning forward. Has anyone spoken to you since that night? Anyone asked you questions without your mother present? She thought for a moment. A man named Mark, she said. He said thank you. The billionaire nodded. Good. What if the person who did it gets mad? Annie asked. Rose's grip tightened. The billionaire was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. That's a fair question, he said. And it's why I want you both protected. He slid a document across the desk. Not a contract, not something with hidden language, just a simple letter. This ensures your employment is secure, he said to Rose, regardless of how this investigation ends. Rose's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. Thank you, she said. And this, he added, turning to Annie, is a promise. He tapped the paper. No one will punish you for telling the truth. Annie stared at the document. People say that, she said. He nodded. They do. He didn't argue. That evening, as they rode the bus home, Annie rested her head against her mother's arm. The city passed by in blurs of light and shadow. She felt tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. Mom, she asked softly, do bad people always get caught? Rose looked out the window for a long time before answering. No, she said. But sometimes they get stopped. Annie thought about the folder, about how close everything had come to breaking, about the people who had trusted the paper because it looked clean and official and safe. Why didn't anyone else see it? She asked. Rose smiled sadly. Because they weren't looking for it, she said, and because no one taught them to listen to their stomach. Annie nodded, satisfied with that answer. That night, as she drifted toward sleep, she imagined the document again, not as a trap, but as a test. One that asked a simple question. Would you look closely? Or would you assume someone else already had? By the end of the week, Annie understood something had shifted permanently, even if no one said it out loud. The building no longer felt like a place she simply passed through while waiting for her mother's shift to end. It felt alert, watchful, as if the walls themselves had learned a lesson and were now paying closer attention to what moved inside them. Rose noticed it too. She cleaned the same floors, emptied the same bins, followed the same routines, but people spoke to her differently now. Not kindly, not cruelly, carefully. The kind of careful that came after something dangerous had almost happened and no one wanted to admit how close it had been. Annie sat on a bench outside a glass-walled conference room, swinging her legs and counting the tiles on the floor. 1, 2, 3, 4. She liked counting. Numbers behaved. They stayed where you put them. Voices drifted through the glass. Audit trail confirms it. Access logs don't match the timeline. Someone assumed he wouldn't read. Annie stopped counting. She leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. Grown-up words buzzed past her like flies. She didn't chase them anymore. She had learned that not understanding everything didn't mean it wasn't important. A shadow fell across her shoes. She opened her eyes to see the billionaire standing there. No jacket, sleeves rolled up, looking like a man who had not slept enough and had stopped pretending that was fine. "Are you waiting for your mom?" he asked. Annie nodded. "May I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the bench. She shrugged. "It's not mine." He sat anyway, leaving a careful distance between them. For a moment, neither spoke. People passed by, nodding to him, glancing at Annie with quick, uncertain looks. "You know," he said finally, "when I was your age, I thought grown-ups knew everything." Annie looked at him. "They don't." He smiled, small and tired. "No, we don't." She considered that. "Then why do they act like they do?" He exhaled. "Because admitting you don't know is risky." Annie frowned. "Isn't signing the wrong paper risky too?" That made him laugh. Not loud. Just a surprised breath that turned into a sound. "Yes," he said. "It is." He looked down at his hands. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Annie nodded immediately. "I said please don't sign it. And after that, I said you should read it again." He nodded. "Do you know why I finally listened?" She shrugged. "Because I didn't stop talking?" "That helped," he admitted. "But mostly because you weren't trying to win. You were trying to warn." Annie absorbed that quietly. Inside the conference room, voices rose briefly, then settled again. Papers slid across tables. Someone cleared their throat. "I want you to know something," he said, turning back to her. "The person who changed that document thought I was untouchable. Thought I trusted my position more than the details." Annie's eyes widened. "Why would they want to hurt you?" He paused. "Not hurt," he corrected. "Control. If I had signed, they could have made decisions without me. Blamed me when it went wrong." Annie's brow furrowed. "That's mean." "Yes," he said simply. "It is. It has a plow." She kicked her feet gently. "Are they going to say sorry?" His mouth tightened. "Probably not." Annie thought about that, about how unfair it felt. "Then what happens?" "Then we make sure they can't do it again," he said. "How?" He looked at her. "By changing how we read things, how we listen, who we think is worth paying attention to." Annie nodded, as if this all made perfect sense. Rose appeared at the end of the hallway, her cart rolling softly. She froze when she saw them together. The billionaire stood. "She's fine," he said quickly. "We were just talking." Rose approached cautiously. "Annie, are you ready to go?" Annie slid off the bench. "Yes." As they turned to leave, the billionaire said, "Rose." She stopped. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for trusting your daughter." Rose hesitated. "I didn't know what she saw," she admitted. "But I knew she wouldn't lie." He nodded. "That made all the difference. They left the building just after sunset. The sky was streaked with orange and gray, the kind of evening that made the city look softer than it really was. On the bus ride home, Annie leaned against the window, watching the lights blur past. Her reflection looked older somehow. Not taller, just steadier. "Mom," she said quietly. "Yes, baby. Did I do something brave?" Rose smiled sadly. "Yes, even though I was scared." Rose reached for her hand. "Especially because you were scared." Annie nodded, satisfied. At home, after dinner and a bath, Annie crawled into bed with her stuffed bear tucked under one arm. Rose sat on the edge of the mattress, smoothing her hair. "What if something like that happens again?" Annie asked. Rose thought for a moment. "Then you remember what you did this time. What if no one listens?" Rose met her eyes. "Then you keep telling the truth anyway." Annie yawned. "Okay, I know." As she drifted toward sleep, Annie thought about the folder again, not as a scary thing, but as a moment. A moment where she had stood still long enough to notice what everyone else had rushed past. She didn't know yet that this was how bigger things always began. Not with shouting, not with power, but with someone small refusing to look away. By the following Monday, the word investigation had acquired weight. It followed people down hallways and settled into empty chairs during meetings. It showed up in pauses that lasted a second too long, in emails rewritten 3 times before being sent, in the way eyes flicked toward doors whenever someone unexpected walked in. Nothing had been announced, but everyone felt it. Annie felt it most clearly in the quiet. The building was quieter now. Not peaceful, careful. Phones were answered more formally. Laughter stopped sooner. Even the elevators seemed to close faster, as if they were in a hurry to get away from the floors where questions were being asked. Rose noticed changes in her schedule. Nothing dramatic, just small adjustments that didn't need explanations. A floor reassigned. A supervisor suddenly present where there hadn't been one before. Extra signatures required for routine tasks. "You're being watched," Rose told Annie one night as they rode the bus home. Annie looked up. "Like I did something wrong?" "No," Rose said quickly. "Like you did something important." Annie considered that. Important felt heavier than wrong. On Tuesday evening, Rose was told to report back to the executive level. The same floor. The same long hallway. Annie's stomach tightened as the elevator climbed. "Do I have to come?" Annie asked. Rose squeezed her hand. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "Just stay close." They stepped off the elevator into the quiet hum of expensive lighting. A man in a suit nodded at them, not unkindly, then gestured toward the corner office. "He's waiting," the man said. The billionaire was standing when they entered. Jacket draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up again. The desk was clear. No folder, no papers, just a tablet and a mug that had long since gone cold. "Thank you for coming," he said. Rose nodded. Annie stood still. "I wanted you here," he continued, looking at Annie, "because something has come up, and I think it's fair that you know." Annie's heart beat faster. "Am I in trouble?" "No," he said immediately. "But someone else might be." He motioned for them to sit. Rose lowered herself into a chair carefully. Annie climbed up beside her. "We traced the changes in the document," he said. "Not just who made them, but who approved the path it took to my desk." "Okay." Annie didn't understand most of that, but she understood his tone. It was serious in a way that didn't rush. "The person responsible knew our processes," he continued. "They knew which reviews could be bypassed, which signatures carried weight, which ones didn't." Rose's fingers curled into her lap. "They also knew I wouldn't expect interference from outside my executive team," he said. "Which means they didn't expect you." Annie swallowed. "Annie," he said, "I need to ask you something important." She nodded. "When you brought me the folder that day," he asked, "did anyone see you?" She thought carefully. "My mom," she said, "and some people in the hallway." "Did anyone speak to you before you reached me?" "No." "Did anyone try to stop you?" Annie shook her head. He nodded slowly. "That matches what we've found." He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. The city glowed below, steady and indifferent. "There are people in this company who believe rules exist for others," he said. "They believe the system protects them." Rose looked down. Annie watched his reflection in the glass. "They also believe children don't matter," he added quietly. Annie felt something tighten in her chest. "I won't let that stand," he said. He turned back toward them. "This investigation will continue. There may be difficult moments. People may be removed. Others may try to protect themselves." Rose inhaled. "What does that mean for us?" "It means you will not be blamed," he said, "and you will not be punished." Annie frowned. "But what if they're mad?" He didn't dismiss the question. "Some people will be," he admitted. "That's why there will be changes." He slid a small device across the desk toward Rose. "This gives you direct access to my office. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call." Rose stared at it, stunned. "Sir, I trust your judgment," he said. "Both of yours." Annie's eyes widened. "I didn't always," he added. "But I'm learning." A knock sounded at the door. A woman stepped in, crisp and composed. She nodded at the billionaire, then glanced briefly at Annie and Rose. "We're ready," she said. He nodded back. "Thank you." He turned to Annie once more. "There's one more thing you should know." She straightened. "The person responsible may try to say this was a misunderstanding," he said. "They may say it was a mistake." Annie shook her head. "It wasn't," He smiled, not amused but appreciative. "No," he said. It wasn't. He opened the door for them himself. In the hallway, Rose exhaled shakily. "That was a lot." Annie nodded. "He's different now." Rose glanced at her. "How so?" "He listens," Annie said simply. That night, Annie dreamed again, but this time it wasn't paper that filled her sleep. It was doors. Doors opening. Doors closing. Some locked. Some left ajar just enough to let light through. She woke before dawn and padded into the kitchen. Rose was already there, coffee untouched, staring at the wall. "Mom?" Annie asked. Rose turned. "Did you sleep?" "A little," Annie said. "Are you scared?" Rose hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Annie climbed into the chair beside her. "Me too." They sat in silence for a moment. "Being scared doesn't mean you were wrong," Rose said finally. Annie nodded. "I know. I was known." That afternoon, as they walked back into the building, Annie noticed a framed poster near the elevator she hadn't seen before. It was simple. Just words. "If something feels wrong, stop. Ask. Read again." She tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Look." Rose read it, then looked down at her daughter, eyes shining. "They put that up for you," she said. Annie shook her head. "For everyone." Rose smiled. "Yes," she said. "For everyone." Annie stood a little taller as they waited for the elevator. She didn't know what would happen next. She only knew that something had been set in motion, and that once you learned to stop and look closely, you couldn't unlearn it. Somewhere upstairs, decisions were being made. Lines were being drawn. And the people who had counted on silence were beginning to understand what it meant when even the smallest voice refused to stay quiet. By Wednesday morning, the investigation had stopped pretending to be polite. Annie sensed it before anyone explained it. The elevators stalled longer on each floor. Security guards she didn't recognize stood near doors that used to stay open. People checked over their shoulders even when no one was there. The building had developed a nervous habit of watching itself. Rose noticed it too, though she tried not to show it. "They're nervous," she said quietly as she wiped fingerprints from a glass wall. When people who think they're untouchable realize they might be touched, everything changes. Annie nodded, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, drawing shapes on a scrap of paper. She didn't ask who they were. She didn't need to. Grown-ups always said they when they meant people with power. That afternoon, the billionaire called another meeting. This time, Annie was not asked to attend. That bothered her more than she expected. She sat outside the conference room again, legs dangling, listening to muffled voices through the glass. They were louder now, sharper. No careful tones, no polite pauses. "This doesn't disappear just because you want it to. The audit trail is clear. You authorized the final version." Annie pressed her palms flat against her knees. She had learned enough to recognize the sound of someone being cornered. The door opened suddenly. A man stormed out, face flushed, jaw clenched. He didn't look at Annie as he passed, but she felt the heat of his anger anyway. A few steps behind him came the billionaire, calm but tight, like a rope pulled too far. "Lock his access," the billionaire said quietly to someone inside the room. Immediately, the door closed again. Annie stared after the man who had left. She didn't know his name. She didn't need to. She recognized the look. She had seen it on school playgrounds when someone was caught cheating and didn't know how to lose. The billionaire turned toward her. "You shouldn't be here," he said gently. "I know," Annie replied. "I'm waiting for my mom." He nodded. "Of course." He sat beside her on the bench, not as relaxed as before. This time, there was no small talk. "They're saying it was an error," he said. Annie frowned. "But it wasn't." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." She hesitated. "Are they lying?" He considered the question. "They're protecting themselves," he said finally. "Some people confuse that with lying." Annie thought about the man's face. He looked scared. "Yes," the billionaire said, "because fear is what happens when control slips." Annie swung her legs. "Is he the bad one?" The billionaire didn't answer right away. "He's one of them," he said carefully. "Rarely is it just one." The conference room door opened again. This time, a woman stepped out, composed but pale. She nodded to the billionaire and glanced briefly at Annie, her eyes lingering just a moment too long. "Legal has confirmed," she said. "We can proceed." The billionaire stood. "Thank you." As she walked away, Annie watched her posture straight, careful, practiced. Annie wondered if she had ever felt that kind of fear before, or if she was feeling it now. "Will he go away?" Annie asked. "Yes," the billionaire said, "and so will others." Annie's chest felt tight. "Because of me? Because of the truth," he corrected. "You just happened to point at it." That evening, Rose came home quieter than usual. She moved slowly through the apartment, setting down her bag, rinsing her mug, folding a towel that didn't need folding. "Something happened," Annie said. Rose looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "You do that thing," Annie said, "with your mouth, when you're thinking too hard." Rose smiled despite herself. "They suspended someone today," she said. "A senior manager." Annie's eyes widened. "Because of the paper?" "Yes." "Are you happy?" Annie asked. Rose hesitated. "I'm relieved," she said. "That's different." Annie nodded. She was learning that words mattered. That night, Annie lay awake listening to the sounds of the building across the street. Sirens, laughter, a television turned too loud. She thought about the man who had stormed out of the conference room, about how his anger had felt bigger than her fear. She wondered if he knew it had been her. The next day, the answer came. An unfamiliar woman approached Annie near the elevators. She smiled too quickly. "You're Annie, right?" she asked. Annie's stomach dropped. She nodded. "I'm with Human Resources," the woman said. "I just wanted to say how impressive it was that you spoke up." Annie waited. Compliments from strangers made her nervous. The woman leaned closer. "You know," she continued, "things like this can get very complicated. Adults handle them best." Annie frowned. "I didn't handle it," she said. "I just told." The woman laughed lightly. "Of course, but sometimes telling causes problems. Confusion. Stress." Annie thought about her mother, about the poster by the elevator, about the billionaire's face when he'd read the document the second time. "It stopped a bad thing," Annie said. The woman's smile tightened. "Yes, but it also upset a lot of people." Annie felt something harden in her chest. "It wasn't my job to make them happy." The woman straightened, surprised. "No," she said coolly. "I suppose not." She walked away without another word. Annie stood very still. That afternoon, the billionaire called Annie and Rose into his office again. "They're testing boundaries," he said plainly, "trying to see who will flinch." Rose nodded. Annie didn't. "I won't let anyone intimidate you," he said, "but I need you to tell me if anyone tries." Annie spoke up. "Someone did." Rose turned sharply. "Who?" Annie described the woman, her smile, her words. The billionaire's jaw tightened. "Thank you," he said. "You did exactly the right thing." Annie tilted her head. "Why are they doing that?" "Because when systems fail," he said, "people try to fix the story instead of the problem." Annie considered that. "Stories are easier." "Yes," he said, "and more dangerous. It is why." As they left the office, Annie felt something settle into place, a quiet understanding. The danger hadn't been the document alone. It had been the way everyone had assumed someone else would notice. Someone else would stop it. Someone else would speak. That evening, Annie sat at the small kitchen table, coloring carefully within the lines. Rose watched her, thinking, "Mom?" Annie asked suddenly. "Yes. If it happens again," Annie said, not looking up, "I'll still say something." "I do." Rose nodded. "I know." Annie smiled faintly. "Even if they don't like it." Rose reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Especially then. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside the building, more doors would close before others opened. More names would disappear from desks. More quiet consequences would ripple outward. And somewhere deep in the machinery of power, a lesson was being learned the hard way. Silence was no longer guaranteed. By Friday, the name of the person who altered the document had not been spoken aloud, but everyone knew it. Annie learned that names didn't need sound to exist. They could live in the way people avoided eye contact. in the way conversations stopped when someone approached, in the sudden emptiness of an office that had once been busy and loud. Absence became its own announcement. The senior manager's badge no longer worked. Annie saw him once, standing near the lobby with a cardboard box in his arms, his shoulders tight, his jaw set in a way that suggested he still believed this wasn't over. No one stood with him. No one said goodbye. Annie watched from a distance, her fingers curled around the strap of her backpack. "Is he leaving?" she asked quietly. Rose followed her gaze. "Yes. Forever?" Rose hesitated. "From here," she said. "From this place. I crease it." Annie thought about the woman from Human Resources, about the careful smile and the warning wrapped in kindness. She wondered where that woman was now, and whether she was still smiling. The building changed again after that. New emails appeared in everyone's inboxes, written in plain language. No jargon, no legal fog. Words like accountability, review, and responsibility stood alone without decoration. Posters were added near elevators and break rooms. Short sentences, simple instructions. If something doesn't make sense, stop. If something feels wrong, ask. If something looks routine, read it again. Annie read them every time she passed, not because she needed the reminder, but because it felt strange to see grown-ups admitting mistakes in public. Rose noticed it too. "They don't usually say things like that," she said one night, wiping down a counter. "Not where everyone can see." "Why now?" Annie asked. Rose smiled without humor. "Because pretending nothing happened is more dangerous than admitting it did." That evening, the billionaire called Annie into his office alone. Rose waited outside, pacing the hallway despite herself. Inside, the office felt quieter than usual. The lights were dimmer. The city outside had softened into dusk. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. Annie climbed up, feet swinging. "I wanted to talk to you without your mom here," he said, not unkindly. "Not because she can't be trusted, because this is about you." Annie nodded. Her stomach fluttered. "You've done something unusual," he continued, "and people are reacting to it in different ways. Some are mad," Annie said. "Yes," he agreed. "Some are grateful. Some are afraid. Some are afraid." "Why afraid?" she asked. He considered. "Because your voice reminded them that power doesn't protect you from consequences." Annie frowned. "It should." He smiled faintly. "Many people believe that. They're wrong." He leaned forward. "I need to ask you something important." She nodded again. "Has anyone else tried to talk to you since the woman from Human Resources?" he asked. Annie thought carefully. "No," she said. "But some people look at me like I broke a rule." He nodded. "You did." Her eyes widened. "Am I in trouble?" "No," he said quickly. "It was a rule that needed breaking." She relaxed slightly. "There's something else," he said. "The board wants to meet you." Annie blinked. "Why?" "Because they want to understand how a 6-year-old saw something they didn't." Annie considered that. "Will they listen?" "They will," he said. "Because they have to." Annie kicked her feet gently. "Okay." The meeting happened the next afternoon. Annie sat at the long table, feet dangling far above the polished floor. Rose beside her, tense but steady. Across from them sat men and women with silver hair and careful expressions. People who had spent decades believing they understood how the world worked. They asked Annie to explain what she had seen. She did, simply, without drama. She talked about the way the paper felt wrong, the words that stood out, the feeling in her stomach. She didn't use legal terms. She didn't try to sound smart. She just told the truth. When she finished, the room stayed silent. Finally, one of the older men cleared his throat. "Why didn't you assume it was a mistake?" he asked. Annie shrugged. "Because mistakes don't hide," she said. "They're loud." The woman beside him nodded slowly. Another board member leaned forward. "What made you keep insisting he read it again?" Annie thought about that. About fear. About the way the billionaire had tried to dismiss her. "Because he didn't look scared," she said. "And I was." 2 eyes. That answer landed harder than anything else, she said. After the meeting, Rose squeezed Annie's hand so tightly it almost hurt. "You did good," she whispered. Annie nodded, exhausted. That night, the billionaire stood alone in his office long after everyone else had gone. He reread the altered document one last time, not to analyze it, but to remember how close he had come to losing everything. He thought about Annie's words. Mistakes don't hide, they're loud. Betrayal, he realized, was quiet. It waited. It smiled. It trusted that no one would slow down enough to notice. The following Monday, a company-wide meeting was held. Not a celebration, not an apology, a reckoning. The billionaire stood on stage. No slides behind him, no prepared speech. "We failed," he said plainly. "Not because someone tried to hurt us, but because we trusted habit more than judgment." He paused. "A child reminded us that attention is not optional." End quote. People shifted in their seats, some uncomfortable, some relieved. "We will change how decisions are reviewed," he continued. "And we will change who is allowed to question them." Annie watched from the back of the room, her head barely visible over the seats. Rose leaned down. "You hear that?" Annie nodded. "They're saying it out loud." "Yes," Rose said. "That's how you know it matters." Later that day, Annie passed the lobby where the senior manager's desk once stood. It had been replaced by a small sign. "If you see something that doesn't make sense, speak up." Annie stopped and read it twice. She smiled. That evening, as they rode the bus home, Annie rested her head against the window. "Mom," she asked, "do you think they'll forget?" Rose thought for a long moment. "Some will," she said. "But not all." Annie nodded. "I won't." Rose smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Neither will I." Is no con, the city rolled past, unaware of the quiet shift taking place inside one building, inside one system, inside one assumption that had finally been broken. And somewhere deep within the company, a new rule was taking hold, not written in policy, but remembered in stories. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was cream-colored, heavy paper, the kind that felt deliberate before it was even opened. Rose found it waiting in their mailbox when she came home from work, tucked between grocery flyers and a utility bill. Her name was typed cleanly on the front. No logo, no return address. She stood in the hallway of their apartment building for a long moment before opening it. Annie watched from the doorway. "Is it bad?" "I don't know yet," Rose said honestly. Inside was a single page. No threats, no accusations, just carefully chosen words. "We are conducting a routine review related to recent internal events at your place of employment. Your cooperation may be requested. Please do not discuss this matter with unauthorized parties." Rose's hands went cold. That night, Annie noticed her mother didn't eat much dinner. She pushed food around her plate, lost in thought, eyes distant. "Mom," Annie said softly. "Did I make more trouble?" Rose looked up sharply. "No," she said, too quickly. Then she softened. "No, baby, you didn't, but you look scared." Rose exhaled. She had promised herself she wouldn't lie. "I am," she admitted. "Because when powerful people get caught, they don't always stop pushing. Sometimes they push back." Annie nodded slowly. "Like when kids get in trouble at school and blame someone else." "Yes," Rose said. "Exactly like that." Was it furious? The next morning, the billionaire called. He didn't speak in circles. "I heard about the letter," he said. "You weren't supposed to receive that yet." Rose's grip tightened on the phone. "What does that mean?" "It means someone is moving faster than they should," he replied, "and not in the right direction." Annie sat at the table, pretending to color, listening. "I won't let this fall on you," he continued. "But I need you to tell me everything. Every conversation, every message, every look that feels off." Rose swallowed. "They're trying to scare us." "Yes," he said, "because fear makes people quiet." Annie spoke up. "It didn't work last time." There was a pause on the line. "No," the billionaire said. "It didn't." That afternoon, Annie was asked to stay home from school. Not suspended, not sick, just advised. A woman from the district called Rose and spoke carefully about flexibility and unusual circumstances. Rose agreed without arguing. though her chest ached with the knowledge that being different always came with a cost. Annie sat on the couch, feet tucked under her, watching cartoons she didn't really see. "Are we hiding?" she asked. Rose shook her head. "We're waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For people to show who they really are," Rose said. The second letter arrived 2 days later. This one was shorter, firmer. It requested an interview. Time and location provided. Downtown, government building. Annie watched her mother read it. "Am I coming?" she asked. Rose hesitated.
I hope so.
"No." Annie's chest tightened. "Why not?" "Because this part isn't for you," Rose said gently. "And because some rooms aren't safe for children, even when they should be." Annie nodded, though she didn't like the answer. The interview lasted 3 hours. Annie spent that time with the billionaire's assistant, a quiet woman named Helen, who brought juice boxes and let Annie ask questions without correcting her grammar. "Why do people lie?" Annie asked at one point. Helen thought about it. "Because the truth costs something." "What if you don't have anything to lose?" Helen smiled sadly. "Then you become dangerous." When Rose returned, her face was pale but steady. "They asked about you," she said to Annie later that night. "What you saw, what you said, whether anyone told you what to do." "What did you say?" Annie asked. "The truth," Rose replied. "That my daughter saw something wrong and refused to stay quiet." Annie leaned against her.
What happens if you do not have anything to
"Did they believe you?" Rose considered. "Some did, some didn't want to." The pressure didn't stop after that. A neighbor asked questions she'd never asked before. A man Rose didn't recognize stood too long near the bus stop one morning. Annie noticed a car she didn't know parked across the street 2 days in a row. "Mom," Annie said quietly. "Are they watching us?" Rose forced a smile. "Probably not," but she didn't sound sure. That evening, the billionaire came to their apartment himself. No entourage, no security, just him, standing in the narrow hallway like a man who knew he didn't belong there but came anyway. "I'm sorry," he said before Rose could speak. "This has gone further than it should have." Dime. Annie watched him closely. He looked tired, different from the man in the glass office. "They're trying to change the story," he continued. "Make this about procedure instead of intent. About confusion instead of deception." Annie frowned, but it wasn't confusing. "No," he agreed. It was deliberate. He knelt in front of Annie, meeting her eyes. "I need to ask you something, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to." Annie nodded. "If they ask you again," he said, "if they try to make you doubt yourself, will you tell the same story?" Annie didn't hesitate. "Yes, even if they say you misunderstood?" "Yes, even if they say it was an accident?" "Yes." He studied her face, searching for something. Fear, doubt. He found none of it. "Why?" he asked. Annie thought for a moment. "Because if I change it, then they win." The billionaire closed his eyes briefly. "You're right," he said, "and that's exactly what they're afraid of." The next week, the story broke quietly, but publicly. Not headlines, not scandals. A notice filed. An investigation expanded. A resignation submitted for personal reasons. The man with the cardboard box did not return. Neither did the woman from Human Resources. At the building, a new email went out. Short, direct. Any attempt to intimidate employees or their families will result in immediate termination. Annie read it over her mother's shoulder. "They're protecting us," she said. Rose nodded. "Because they can't undo what you started." That night, Annie lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the city. Sirens, laughter, a train in the distance. She thought about fear, about how it moved from person to person, looking for somewhere to live. She had felt it, but she hadn't kept it. Instead, she had passed it back to the people who deserved it. And for the first time since this all began, Annie slept through the night without dreaming of paper. The court date arrived without ceremony. No cameras waited outside the building. No reporters lingered on the steps. Just a gray morning, a government seal above the door, and people who moved with the quiet urgency of those who knew this was serious, even if no one else was watching. Rose held Annie's hand as they walked inside. "You don't have to say anything today," Rose reminded her for the third time. "You just have to be there." Annie nodded. She understood the difference now. Being there mattered. The room was smaller than Annie expected. No wooden benches like on television. No shouting. Just a long table. A judge with tired eyes. Lawyers with folders stacked too neatly in front of them. The billionaire sat several rows ahead, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. He didn't turn around, but Annie knew he was aware of them. He always was. They took their seats. The man who had altered the document sat on the other side of the room. Annie recognized him immediately. His hair was combed the same way. His suit was still expensive, but something essential was gone. The certainty, the belief that rules bent around him. He did not look at Annie. The hearing began slowly. Language Annie didn't fully understand filled the air. Terms like material misrepresentation, fiduciary breach, and deliberate concealment. The words felt heavy, but distant, like listening to adults speak underwater. Then her name was spoken. Annie Johnson, the clerk said. Annie's heart jumped. Rose squeezed her hand. Remember, she whispered. Just the truth. Annie stood. Her legs felt wobbly, but she stayed upright. The judge looked at her over his glasses. His voice was calm. How old are you? Annie. 6, she said. And you understand why you're here? Yes, Annie replied. Because I saw something wrong. The lawyer across the room shifted. Annie noticed. Can you tell us what you saw? The judge asked. Annie took a breath. She didn't rush. She didn't embellish. She told it exactly the way she had told it every time before. About the folder. About the words that felt wrong. About asking the billionaire to read it again. About being scared. No one interrupted her. When she finished, the room was quiet. The lawyer on the other side cleared his throat. Annie, he said gently, do you know what a contract is? No, Annie said honestly. Then how can you be sure you understood what you read? Annie looked at him. She didn't feel small anymore. I didn't understand all of it, she said. I understood enough. He smiled thinly. Enough to accuse a senior executive of wrongdoing? I didn't accuse, Annie said. I warned. A murmur rippled through the room. The judge raised a hand for silence. He looked at Annie again, this time with something like respect. Thank you, he said. You may sit. Gods. Annie sat down, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. Rose leaned close. You did perfect, she whispered. Annie shook her head. I just told. That was enough. The hearing continued for another hour. Documents were entered. Timelines laid out. The alterations to the contract were shown clearly, deliberately placed to shift legal responsibility to one signature, one person. The man finally looked up, not at the judge, not at the lawyers, at Annie. His eyes held anger first, then something else. Recognition. She didn't look away. When it was over, no verdict was announced. That would come later. But something had shifted. Annie felt it in the air, like pressure releasing after a long storm. Outside, Rose hugged her tightly. You were so brave, she said, her voice shaking. I was scared, Annie replied. Rose nodded. That's how I know. The billionaire approached them a moment later. No smile. No words wasted. It's moving forward, he said, the way it should have from the beginning. Annie looked up at him. Is he going to say sorry? He paused. Probably not, Annie frowned. Then why does it still feel like we won? The billionaire considered that. Because the truth didn't move, he said. It stayed where it was. That night, the apartment felt different, lighter. Not safe exactly, but steadier. Rose cooked dinner while Annie sat at the table, drawing pictures of people holding hands around a big building. She added small figures near the bottom and one very tall one in the middle. That's you? Rose asked, smiling. Annie shook her head. That's everyone. Later, as Annie brushed her teeth, she looked at herself in the mirror longer than usual. She looked the same. Same braids, same missing tooth, same pajamas, but she felt older. Not in years. In understanding. Mom? She called. Yes? Do you think bad people always think they're right? Rose leaned against the doorway. Most of them do. Annie nodded. That's why they don't read again. Rose smiled softly. Exactly. The next morning, the news finally used words, a brief article,
They really do.
buried on page 3. No names for the child,
That's why we don't read.
no photos, just facts. Internal fraud investigation expands. Senior executive charged. Company cooperation noted. Annie read it with her finger tracing the lines. That's it? She asked. Rose shrugged. That's how it goes.
Yeah,
Annie folded the paper carefully.
that's just how
I
it
like
goes.
our version better. So do I, Rose said.
I like our
At
version
school,
better.
Annie's teacher pulled her aside. Your mom told me you've been through a lot, she said gently. If you need time, I'm okay, Annie said, and she meant it. During recess, another child asked why she'd been gone.
I am okay.
Annie thought for a moment. I stopped something bad, she said. The other child nodded, as if that made sense. Cool. Eyeing. That afternoon, a new sign went up in the building lobby. Annie saw it when she visited with her mom after school. It wasn't corporate language this time. No policy, no logo. It was handwritten, framed, simple. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Slow down. Read again. Annie smiled. The world hadn't changed all at once. Power still existed. People still lied. Fear still tried to find new homes. But one quiet assumption had been broken. That children didn't matter. That voices like Annie's could be ignored. That truth could be rushed past. And once that assumption cracked, it could never fully be repaired. The verdict came quietly, the way real consequences often did. No one called Annie to tell her. No one knocked on the door with news. Rose learned about it from an email forwarded by the billionaire late one evening. The subject line plain, almost modest. Outcome. She read it twice before sitting down. Annie noticed immediately. Is it over? She asked. Rose nodded slowly. Yes, she said. It's over. What happened? Annie asked. Rose hesitated, then chose her words carefully. The man who changed the document was found responsible, she said. He's going to prison. Annie absorbed that in silence. Is that good? She asked finally. Rose looked at her daughter for a long time before answering. It's necessary, she said. Not everything that's necessary feels good. Annie nodded. That made sense to her. The next week, the building felt different again. Not tense this time. Not watchful. Settled. People smiled more easily, laughed without checking who might hear. Doors reopened, meetings ended on time. The quiet fear that had lived in the corners seemed to have packed its things and left without saying goodbye. Annie noticed the absence of certain faces. The senior manager, the woman from Human Resources, a few others whose names she never learned but whose footsteps she no longer heard. They're gone, Annie said one night as Rose cleaned an empty office. Yes, Rose said. They are. One too that. Did they all do bad things? Rose wiped the desk slowly. Some did, she said. Some just looked away. Annie frowned. Is that bad too? Rose met her eyes. Sometimes it's worse. That answer stayed with Annie. The billionaire invited them to lunch on a Saturday. Not at the building. Somewhere smaller. Quieter. A place where no one wore suits and no one checked their phone every 2 minutes. Annie ordered pancakes. Rose ordered coffee and nothing else. I wanted to thank you properly, the billionaire said, once the food arrived. Not as a CEO. As a person, Annie tilted her head. You already said thank you. Yes, he said. But this is different. He looked at Rose. Your daughter didn't just save me, he said. She changed how this company works. Rose shifted uncomfortably. She's just a child. He smiled. That's exactly why it worked. He turned back to Annie. Do you know what happens now? Annie shrugged. You read more? He laughed. Yes, he said. We all do. Annie poked at her pancakes. Will you forget? His smile faded. I hope not, he said. And I'm putting things in place to make sure I don't. What things? Annie asked. Systems, he replied. And people who are allowed to question me. Annie nodded approvingly. That's good. The billionaire hesitated. There's something else I want to offer, he said. Rose stiffened. Annie noticed. I'd like to help with Annie's education. he said carefully. Not as a reward. As an investment. Rose opened her mouth to protest. No conditions, he added quickly. No expectations, just support. Annie looked between them. Why? He thought for a moment. Because the world needs people who notice, he said, and because it tried very hard to teach you not to. Rose swallowed. We'll think about it, she said. That night, after Annie was asleep, Rose sat at the small kitchen table staring at the city lights through the window. The offer sat between relief and fear. Like everything else in their lives, Annie woke briefly and padded into the kitchen, dragging her blanket behind her. Mom, she said sleepily. Are you worried again? Rose smiled sadly. A little. About the money? Annie asked. Rose blinked. How did you know? Annie shrugged. Grown-ups worry about money when they stop smiling. Is then. Rose laughed softly. That's true. Annie climbed into her lap. You don't have to decide now, she said. Rose kissed her forehead. Neither do you. In the weeks that followed, the story faded from public memory. New scandals replaced it. New headlines took its place. Annie returned to school full-time. Rose returned to her routines, but some things didn't fade. The posters stayed up, the new review processes stayed in place, and the phrase "read it again" became a quiet joke among employees, a reminder that had teeth. One afternoon, Annie visited the building with Rose after school. As they passed the lobby, a young man stopped them. You're Annie, right? He asked. Annie nodded cautiously. I just wanted to say, he continued, I stopped a mistake last week. Because of you. Annie blinked. Me? He nodded. Something didn't add up. I would have ignored it before, but I didn't. Annie smiled. Good. R1. He laughed, surprised by her certainty. Yeah, he said. Good. That night, Annie drew in her notebook. Not people this time. Words. She wrote slowly, carefully, her letters uneven, but determined. If you feel scared, look closer. If someone tells you to hurry, stop. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Rose watched from the doorway, heart full and aching all at once. Where did you learn that? She asked. Annie looked up. From Dad, she said simply. Rose felt her throat tighten. Annie's father had died years ago. Not violently, not dramatically, just gone too soon, leaving behind quiet lessons and unfinished sentences. He used to say that? Rose asked softly. Annie nodded. He said people rush because they don't want to see. Rose sat beside her, tears blurring her vision. Yes, she said. He did. Months later, Annie stood on a small stage at school for an assembly about honesty. She read from her notebook, voice steady despite the microphone. The audience clapped politely, some warmly, some distracted, but one teacher wiped her eyes. That was enough. The world didn't become fair overnight. Annie learned that quickly. People still cut corners. Power still protected itself. Truth still asked for courage. But Annie also learned something else. That one small voice, used at the right moment, could echo longer than anyone expected. And that once you learned to slow down and look closely, you could never go back to rushing past what mattered. By the time spring arrived, Annie understood that endings were rarely endings at all. They were pauses. Places where the world caught its breath before moving on in a slightly different direction. The building no longer frightened her. When she walked through the lobby with her mother after school, it felt almost ordinary again, people rushing, elevators chiming, phones ringing with familiar urgency. But Annie knew better now. Ordinary didn't mean unchanged. She noticed small things. A junior analyst stopping mid-sentence to say, "Let me check that again." An executive asking a quiet assistant for her opinion. Meetings that ended later because no one wanted to be the person who rushed past a doubt. None of it made headlines. None of it was dramatic. But it was real. Rose felt it too, though she struggled to name it. You know, she said one evening as they cleaned an empty conference room, I've worked in places my whole life where people like me weren't supposed to matter. We were invisible. Useful, but invisible. Annie wiped a chair carefully.
It's okay, Mom.
You matter,
We belong
she said.
there, too.
Rose smiled. I know that. Now, Annie tilted her head. Didn't you before? Rose paused. I did.
You matter.
But it's different. When the world agrees with you. That stayed with Annie. The billionaire kept his distance after the verdict, not because he forgot, but because he understood something had changed between them. Gratitude had given way to respect, and respect didn't need constant reminders. When he did call, it was never dramatic. A short message, a check-in, a question that assumed Annie's answer mattered. One afternoon, he asked her something unexpected. What do you want to be when you grow up? He said over speakerphone while Annie sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring. Annie didn't answer right away. Rose raised an eyebrow but stayed quiet. I don't know yet, Annie said finally. That's a good answer, he replied. Annie frowned. It is? Yes, he said. It means you're not rushing. She smiled at that. At school, Annie's teacher noticed changes too. You're very observant, she told Annie after class one day. You ask questions other children don't think to ask. Annie shrugged. I just don't like when things don't make sense. That's a gift, the teacher said. Annie wasn't sure she liked the word gift. Gifts felt like things that could be taken away. This felt more like a responsibility. One afternoon, a boy in her class was accused of cheating on a spelling test. He stood at the front of the room, eyes down, shoulders tight, while the teacher questioned him. Annie raised her hand. Yes, Annie? The teacher said, surprised. He didn't cheat, Annie said. The room went quiet. How do you know? The teacher asked. Because he always spells those words right, Annie said. And because he looked confused, not sneaky. The teacher studied the boy, then the paper, then Annie. After a moment, she nodded. Sit down, she told the boy. We'll talk later. At recess, the boy walked up to Annie. Thanks, he said awkwardly. Annie nodded. It just didn't feel right. That phrase followed her through the weeks. Didn't feel right. Rose heard it too often to ignore. One evening, she sat Annie down at the small kitchen table. I need to ask you something, Rose said gently. And I need you to answer honestly. Annie nodded. Do you feel like you have to fix everything now? Rose asked. Annie frowned. No. Do you feel like it's your job to stop bad things? Rose continued. Annie thought carefully. No, she said. Just the ones I see. Rose exhaled, relieved. That's important, she said. Because the world is heavy, Annie. And you're still small. Annie reached across the table and held her mother's hand. You help me, she said. Rose smiled through the ache in her chest. Always. As summer approached, the company announced a new initiative. Not flashy, not named after anyone. Just a quiet program that encouraged employees at every level to flag concerns without fear. Annie read the internal memo over her mother's shoulder. They're still doing it, she said. Yes, Rose said, because stopping once wouldn't be enough. With comment. One Saturday morning, the billionaire invited them to a small event at the building. Nothing formal, just coffee, pastries, and a group of employees standing in a circle instead of rows. He spoke briefly. This company nearly failed because we trusted silence more than courage, he said. That will not happen again. Annie stood beside her mother, unnoticed by most, but watching everything. Afterward, a woman approached Annie. Older, tired eyes, kind smile. I was the one who almost approved that document, she said quietly. Before it reached him, Annie's eyes widened. I missed it. The woman continued. I was in a hurry. I assumed someone else had checked. Annie nodded. Yes, the woman said. It does. Thank you for not assuming. Annie didn't know what to say, so she just smiled. That night, she lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city, thinking about all the moments she would never see, all the quiet choices people made every day. She thought about how easy it was to rush, how tempting it was to look away, how comforting it was to believe someone else would speak up. She understood now why so many people didn't. It wasn't because they were bad. It was because they were tired, because being careful took energy, because courage asked for attention when attention was already stretched thin. Annie rolled onto her side, clutching her stuffed bear. She didn't feel like a hero. She didn't feel special. She felt awake, and that, she realized, might be enough. The world would keep testing people, quietly, patiently, with neatly typed papers and rushed conversations and rules that bent just enough to hide their sharp edges. Some would still fail, but some wouldn't, because somewhere along the way, a 6-year-old girl had learned to trust the feeling in her stomach and taught a room full of adults to slow down long enough to feel it too. By early summer, Annie learned that change had a sound. It wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It sounded like hesitation before agreement, like a chair scraping back because someone stood up to ask a question, like a meeting that ended with silence instead of applause. It sounded like people thinking. Rose noticed it most in the break room. Conversations had shifted. Where there had once been complaints whispered under breath, there were now careful discussions spoken out loud. "I don't think this makes sense," someone would say. "Can we slow down a second?" Another would add, "Let's read it again," someone else would suggest, half joking, half serious. Those words always made Annie smile. She sat on the floor near the vending machines, drawing with crayons while her mother worked. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Listening had become her habit. One afternoon, a man she'd never seen before sat beside her on the floor. "You're Annie," he said, not asking. Annie looked up cautiously. "Yes, I'm new," he said. "Transferred in last month." She nodded. "They told us your story during orientation," he continued. "Not your name, just what happened." Annie frowned. "Why? So we wouldn't forget," he said. "So we wouldn't assume." She considered that. "Did it help?" He smiled. "I think so. I asked a question last week that I wouldn't have asked before." Annie returned to her drawing. "Good, Izad." The man laughed softly and stood, leaving her with that word hanging in the air again. Good. At home, life had settled into something like normal. Rose still worked evenings. Annie still did homework at the small kitchen table. They still watched old movies on Fridays and shared popcorn from the same bowl. But something had changed between them too. Rose no longer apologized for taking up space. She spoke more firmly with supervisors, asked questions instead of nodding, corrected people when they got details wrong about her job or her daughter. Annie noticed. "You talk louder now," Annie said one night. Rose smiled. "I do. Why?"
You talk louder now.
Rose thought for a moment. "Because I remembered I'm allowed to." Annie nodded. That made sense. The billionaire called less often now, but when he did, it was never about the past. It was about decisions, directions, doubts. One evening, he asked Annie something that surprised her. "Do you think people can change?" he asked. Annie lay on her stomach on the living room floor, chin resting in her hands. "Some can," she said. "Which ones?" he asked. "The ones who listen when they're scared," Annie replied. There was a pause on the line. "That's accurate," he said quietly. As summer deepened, the company announced the final step in its internal reforms. No ceremony, no speeches, just a policy update that gave equal weight to concerns raised by any employee, regardless of role. Rose read it twice, then once more. "They finally wrote it down," she said. Annie looked up from her book. "Does that mean it's real?" Rose smiled. "It means it's harder to pretend it isn't." The building hosted a small gathering to mark the change. Not a celebration, a reminder. Annie stood near the back with Rose, watching people she recognized and many she didn't. Faces old and new, some proud, some uneasy. The billionaire spoke briefly. "This didn't start with policy," he said. "It started with attention, and it will only last if we keep paying it." No applause followed, just nods. Afterward, a woman approached Annie. Her hair was gray, her posture careful. "I've worked here 30 years, the woman said. "I signed things I didn't understand because I trusted the people above me." Annie listened. "I won't do that anymore," the woman continued. "Because of you, beloved." Annie shook her head. "Because of you," she said. "You just said it." The woman smiled, eyes shining. That night, Annie dreamed of hallways again. But this time, the doors were open. Light spilled out, warm and steady. No rushing, no shadows hiding behind neat labels. She woke calm. Weeks later, Annie's school asked her to speak at a small assembly about courage. Not a big stage, just a microphone, a gymnasium, and parents sitting on folding chairs. Annie stood at the front, feet planted, heart steady. She didn't tell the whole story. She didn't mention billionaires or investigations or courtrooms. She said something simpler. Sometimes grown-ups think they have to hurry, she said. But when you hurry, you miss things. If something feels wrong, it might be because it is. And it's okay to say so. A few parents nodded. A few looked uncomfortable. One man crossed his arms, then slowly uncrossed them. Afterward, a teacher thanked Annie. That was very wise, she said. Annie shrugged. I just told what happened. That was becoming her answer to everything. One evening near the end of summer, Rose and Annie walked past the building without going inside. The sun was low, turning the glass orange. Do you miss it? Rose asked. Annie shook her head. No, I remember it. Rose smiled. That's better. They sat on a bench across the street, watching people come and go. Life moving forward, as it always did. Mom? Annie asked quietly. Yes? Do you think someone else will need to say it someday? Annie asked. Yes, Rose said. I think they will. Annie nodded. I hope they do. She didn't mean she hoped something bad would happen. She meant she hoped someone would notice, someone would stop, someone would speak, because Annie had learned something important. Truth didn't always need power. Courage didn't always need permission. And change didn't always begin with someone important. Sometimes it began with a small voice saying, calmly and clearly, please read it again. By the time autumn arrived, Annie had stopped thinking of what happened as something that belonged to the past. It lived in the present now, woven quietly into routines and habits, into the way people paused before agreeing, into the way Rose checked her work twice without feeling small for doing so. The city changed with the season. Leaves gathered along the sidewalks. The air sharpened. Mornings came darker. Annie walked to school holding her mother's hand, backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders. She had grown a little taller over the summer, not enough for strangers to notice, but enough for Rose to feel it when she hugged her. Slow down, Rose said as Annie tugged her forward. Annie smiled. I'm not rushing, she said. I'm just excited. School felt easier now. Not because lessons were simpler, but because Annie trusted herself more. When something didn't make sense, she asked. When someone brushed her off, she waited and asked again. Most teachers listened. Some didn't. Annie learned the difference. One afternoon, her class was assigned a group project. 4 students, 1 poster, 1 deadline. The other children talked over each other, voices overlapping, ideas competing. Annie watched quietly. They decided quickly. Too quickly. This part is wrong, Annie said softly, pointing to a number written in thick marker. A boy rolled his eyes. It's close enough. What a duke-est. Annie shook her head. Close enough is how you lose points. The boy sighed. It doesn't matter. Annie picked up the paper and checked it again. It matters. The group groaned, but they fixed it. They got the highest grade. After class, the teacher pulled Annie aside. You have good instincts, she said, but be careful not to make others uncomfortable. Annie frowned. Why? The teacher hesitated. Some people don't like being corrected. Annie nodded. They can read it again. We have contrast. The teacher laughed despite herself. At home, Rose listened to the story while chopping vegetables for dinner. You said that? Rose asked, smiling. Annie nodded. I wasn't mean. I know, Rose said. And you weren't wrong. That night, Rose found herself thinking about her own life before Annie was born. The times she had stayed quiet because it was easier. The times she had let things slide because challenging them felt dangerous. She wondered how many moments she had rushed past. The thought didn't fill her with regret so much as resolve. The building continued its quiet transformation. New hires were trained differently now. Orientation included stories instead of rules, real examples instead of policies no one read. Annie's story was one of them. Still nameless, still anonymous, but it lived. One evening, Rose overheard 2 executives talking near the elevators. If that kid hadn't stopped it, one said. The other shook his head. Doesn't matter who stopped it. Matters that someone did. Rose smiled to herself. Annie noticed too. They don't say the janitor's daughter anymore, Annie said as they rode the elevator. No, Rose said. They don't. Why? Annie asked. Because they learned names don't matter as much as actions, Rose replied. Annie considered that. That's good. In October, the billionaire invited Rose to attend a panel discussion hosted by the company. Ethics. Accountability, the kind of event Rose would have avoided before, convinced she didn't belong. This time, she went. Annie sat in the audience with her, swinging her legs, listening as adults spoke about responsibility and power and failure. One man on the panel said something that made Annie tilt her head. "We didn't see the risk because we trusted the process," he said. Annie raised her hand. The moderator blinked. "Yes? The process didn't read," Annie said simply. "People do." The room went quiet. The billionaire smiled. Afterward, Rose crouched down in front of Annie. "You didn't have to do that." Annie shrugged. "He was wrong." Rose laughed softly. "Yes," she said. "He was." As the year moved on, Annie began to notice something else. Adults asked her questions now. Not polite ones, real ones. "What do you think? Does this make sense? What would you do?" She answered honestly when she could, and when she couldn't, she said so. "I don't know," she would say. "I'd have to read it." That answer became her favorite. One evening, as they walked home under a sky heavy with clouds, Annie asked, "Mom, do you think this will always be my job?" Rose stopped walking.
You hear me?
"What?" "To notice," Annie said. "To say something." Rose knelt so they were eye to eye. "No," she said firmly. "It's not your job. It's everyone's." Annie searched her face. "Then why do I keep doing it?" Rose smiled. "Because you care," she said, "and because you learned early what happens when people don't." Annie nodded slowly. "I don't want to forget." "You won't," Rose said. "But even if you do someday, someone else won't." That comforted Annie. Late one night, Annie dreamed she was very small again, standing in a long hallway with a single piece of paper in her hands. The hallway stretched endlessly, doors closing as she ran. Then, one by one, the doors opened. People stepped out, took the paper, read it carefully, passed it along. Annie woke calm. Weeks later, the billionaire sent Rose a short message. They had completed the final phase of their reforms. Independent oversight, rotating reviews, anonymous reporting without consequence. "It's done," Rose read aloud. Annie looked up from her homework. "All of it? All of what they can do," Rose said. Annie nodded. "That's enough." As winter approached, the city prepared itself again. Lights went up, streets glittered, people hurried, coats pulled tight, breath visible in the cold. Annie watched them from the bus window. "Everyone's rushing," she said. Rose smiled. "Yes." Annie pressed her forehead to the glass. "I hope someone stops." Rose squeezed her hand. Someone will, because Annie had learned something the world could not take from her. That noticing was a skill. That slowing down was a choice. That courage didn't need permission. And that once you learned to read again, you carried that habit with you quietly, stubbornly into every room you entered. By the first snowfall, Annie understood that time didn't erase lessons, it tested whether they stayed. The city slowed in small, reluctant ways. Cars crept along slick streets. People hunched into coats, breath fogging the air as they waited for buses that arrived late and full. Annie liked winter because it forced everyone to move more carefully. You couldn't rush without consequences. You couldn't pretend the ground wasn't slippery. At school, a new teacher joined mid-year. He was young, eager, and moved too fast. Annie noticed it immediately, the way he skimmed worksheets, the way he nodded before listening, the way he said, "We'll fix it later," as if later were guaranteed. One morning, he handed out a test with a problem that didn't add up. Annie stared at it for a long time. She raised her hand. "Yes, Annie?" he said, already turning away. "This question is wrong," she said. He smiled politely. "Just do your best." Annie didn't put her hand down. "It doesn't work," she said again. "There isn't an answer." The room grew quiet. The teacher frowned, then glanced at the page. "It's fine," he said, though uncertainty crept into his voice. "Sometimes math is tricky." Annie stood up. She didn't mean to. Her body just moved. "It's not tricky," she said calmly. "It's missing something." A few kids snickered.
It's just missing
Someone whispered. The teacher sighed, irritation flashing across his face. "Sit down, Annie." She hesitated. Her heart thumped. She thought about her mom's hand squeezing hers, about the poster by the elevator, about the feeling in her stomach that never lied. She stayed standing. "I can show you," she said. There was a long pause. Finally, the teacher exhaled and walked over. He read the question again. Slower this time. His shoulders dropped. "You're right," he said quietly. "There's a piece missing." Annie sat down. After class, he stopped her at the door. "You could have embarrassed me," he said, not unkindly. Annie looked up at him.
I understand.
"I didn't want to,"
I didn't
she
want to
said.
embarrass you. I just
"I wanted you to read it again." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it. At home that night, Rose listened to the story with a mixture of pride and concern. "You're learning when to speak," she said. "That's good," Annie nodded. "I don't always," she admitted. "Sometimes I'm tired." Rose smiled. "That's okay too." The building downtown glowed brighter during the holidays. Lights framed the lobby. A small tree stood near the elevators. People exchanged greetings that felt warmer than before. Annie noticed a new ritual forming. Before big meetings, someone would say, "Let's take a minute." Not because policy required it, because habit had changed. Rose watched it happen from the edges, mop in hand, unnoticed and very much seen at the same time. One evening, as she finished her shift, a supervisor approached her. "You know," the woman said, "I used to think confidence came from being certain." Rose waited. "Now I think it comes from being willing to pause," the woman continued. "Your daughter taught us that." Rose felt the familiar ache rise in her chest, the kind that came from recognition arriving late but sincere. "Thank you," she said simply. Winter break arrived. Annie spent afternoons drawing and reading, evenings helping Rose cook soup that steamed up the small kitchen windows. One night, as snow fell thick and silent outside, Annie asked, "Mom, do you think I'll always be this way?" Rose smiled. "What way?" "Stopping," Annie said, noticing. Rose considered. "You might change how you do it," she said, "but I think you'll always care." Annie nodded. "I hope so." The billionaire sent a holiday card. No logo, no signature flourish, just a short note in careful handwriting. "Thank you for reminding us to slow down. We're still reading." Annie traced the words with her finger. "He remembers," she said. "Yes," Rose said, "and so do you." The new year came with sharp, cold, and clean calendars. People made promises. Some kept them. At the company, the reforms held. Not perfectly, not always, but enough. Annie returned to school with new shoes and the same backpack. She didn't feel special. She felt prepared. One afternoon, a friend whispered, "Why do teachers listen to you?" Annie thought about it. "They don't always," she said. "I just keep talking." The friend laughed. "That's brave," Annie shrugged. "It's easier than pretending." Spring crept back into the city slowly, uncertainly. Snow melted into gray puddles. Buds appeared on stubborn branches. Annie grew another inch. She visited the building less often now. Rose's shifts changed. Life moved forward, but the habits stayed. One last time, late in the season, Annie and Rose walked past the lobby together. The handwritten sign was gone, replaced by something more formal, polished, permanent. "Attention saves us time. Questions save us from regret. Read it again." Annie smiled. "Do you think they'll ever take it down?" she asked. Rose shook her head. Not without noticing. They stepped back into the street. Traffic humming. People rushing past. Annie watched them go. She didn't stop everyone. She didn't try. She just stayed ready. Because the world would keep offering neatly typed papers and hurried decisions and moments that asked for silence instead of courage. And somewhere, somehow, someone would need to hear a small voice say, steady and unafraid, "Please read it again." By the time Annie turned 7, she no longer remembered the exact moment when she learned adults could be wrong. What she remembered was what came after. The pause, the hesitation, the moment when someone stopped long enough to look again. That had become the shape of her memory. Her birthday came quietly. A cake from the grocery store. A single candle. Rose singing softly off-key, laughing at herself. Annie made a wish, but she didn't say it out loud. She had learned some things were better kept private until they were strong enough to stand on their own. At school, her teacher asked the class what they wanted to be when they grew up. Doctor, firefighter, artist, teacher. When it was Annie's turn, she thought carefully. Someone who notices, she said. The room went quiet. That's not a job, a boy said, laughing. Annie shrugged. It's a skill. The teacher smiled and wrote it down anyway. At the building downtown, a new internal audit began. Routine. Expected. Quiet. The kind of thing that happened now without fear or resistance. Rose noticed something unusual. They invited her to speak. Not formally, not at the front of the room. Just a chair pulled into a circle during a training session. We want your perspective, a manager said. You see things we don't. Rose hesitated. Old instincts flared. The urge to stay invisible. Then she thought of Annie standing in a classroom, refusing to sit down. I clean, Rose said slowly. I listen. I see patterns. People talk when they think no one important is around. The room stayed silent. Not dismissive. Attentive. That matters, someone said. Rose felt something shift inside her. Not pride, permission. Annie waited outside, drawing in her notebook. When Rose came out, eyes bright and tired, Annie looked up. Did you say it? She asked. Rose nodded. I did. Okay. Annie smiled. Good. As spring deepened, the city prepared for another cycle of growth. Construction sites appeared. Sidewalks cracked and were repaired. New signs replaced old ones. Change, Annie had learned, wasn't loud. It was cumulative. One afternoon, the billionaire asked Annie to walk with him through the building. Not a tour, just a walk. They passed offices where people worked quietly, heads bent, screens glowing. They don't know you're here, he said. Annie nodded. That's okay. They stopped near a glass wall overlooking the city. Do you ever feel tired of it? He asked. Being careful? Annie thought. No, she said. Being careful is rest. Rushing is tired. He laughed softly. I wish I'd learned that sooner. So do they, Annie said, nodding toward the offices. He was quiet for a long moment. You know, he said finally, people will forget my name someday, but they'll remember this change. Annie looked up at him. That's better. Even Offingdallers, he smiled. Yes, it is. At home, Rose began taking evening classes. Nothing dramatic. Just one course at a community college. Management basics. Communication. Things she'd been doing for years without the language to name them. Annie sat beside her while she studied. You're learning too, Annie said. Rose laughed. I always was. One night, as rain tapped against the windows, Annie asked, Mom, do you think bad things stop happening? Rose shook her head. No, Annie nodded. Me neither. Then why do we try? Rose asked. Annie didn't answer right away. She watched the rain slide down the glass, each drop slow, deliberate. Because stopping once is still stopping, she said. Rose closed her book and pulled Annie close. You're right. At school, Annie faced her first real test of silence. A teacher made a joke about a student's accent. Not cruel. Casual. The kind that slipped by because it wasn't meant to hurt. The room laughed. Annie felt the familiar tightening in her stomach. She raised her hand. The teacher looked surprised. Yes? That wasn't kind, Annie said quietly. The laughter faded. The teacher blinked, then nodded. You're right, she said. I'm sorry. Later, a girl with braids like Annie's thanked her in a whisper. Annie nodded. You don't have to thank me. The girl smiled anyway. Rose heard about it that evening. You won't always be thanked, Rose said carefully. I know, Annie replied. That has to be okay. It is, Annie said. I don't do it for that. That answer stayed with Rose all night. Summer returned again. Warmer this time. Fuller. Annie ran faster now. Thought deeper. Asked harder questions. But the core remained unchanged. She still stopped when things felt wrong. She still trusted the pause. She still believed reading again was an act of care. One afternoon, Annie and Rose passed the building one last time before moving to a different neighborhood, closer to Rose's classes, farther from the place where everything began. Annie looked up at the glass tower. "It looks smaller," she said. Rose smiled. "It didn't change," she said. "You did."
Will they remember
Annie
me?
considered that. "Do you think they'll remember me?" she asked. Rose shook her head gently. "They don't need to." Annie smiled. "Good." They walked on, hand in hand, into a street filled with noise and movement, and people in a hurry. Annie didn't try to stop them all. She just stayed alert, because she understood now what her younger self hadn't been able to name. That courage wasn't loud. That justice didn't always announce itself. That some of the most important work in the world happened quietly, without witnesses, without reward. And that once you learned to notice, truly notice, you carried that responsibility with you, not as a burden, but as a way of seeing. By the time Annie understood what endings were supposed to feel like, she had already learned they were rarely clean. They arrived quietly, disguised as ordinary days. The new neighborhood was smaller. Fewer tall buildings, more trees. The kind of place where people nodded when they passed each other and meant it. Rose liked it immediately. Annie noticed how her mother slept more deeply there, how the tension she'd carried for years seemed to loosen without being asked. The first morning after they moved, Annie woke early and sat by the window. Sunlight spilled across unfamiliar sidewalks. A man walked his dog slowly, stopping to let the animal sniff whatever it pleased. No rushing. Annie smiled. At her new school, no one knew her story. No teachers whispered. No adults watched her with careful eyes. She liked that. Her teacher introduced her simply. "This is Annie," she said. "Make her feel welcome." And they did. Days passed. Weeks. Annie learned new routines, new faces, new rhythms. She still noticed things, of course she did, but now she noticed laughter first, kindness, small moments that didn't need fixing. One afternoon, a substitute teacher handed out permission slips for a field trip. Annie read hers carefully. Something was missing. She raised her hand. The teacher sighed, clearly tired.
This section here is
"Yes? This doesn't say where we're going," Annie said. The teacher glanced at it. "It's the museum. Same as always. But it doesn't say," Annie repeated. A pause. The teacher took the paper back, frowned, then nodded. "You're right," she said. "Thank you." The class waited while she corrected it. No one rolled their eyes. No one laughed. No one whispered. Annie sat back, calm. At home that evening, Rose listened to the story and smiled. "You didn't even sound nervous." Annie shrugged. "Why would I be?" Rose laughed softly. "That's a good question." The billionaire called less often now. When he did, it was brief. Updates, mostly. The company was stable. The oversight committee permanent. The changes holding. One evening, he said something unexpected. "I won't be CEO forever," he said. "And that's as it should be." Annie nodded. "Things shouldn't stay the same just because they're comfortable." There was a pause on the line. "You're wiser than most adults I know," he said. Annie frowned. "I just think slower." That became the phrase Rose remembered later. Think slower. As summer faded into its final weeks, Annie began to feel something new. Not fear, not responsibility, closure. She didn't need the building anymore. She didn't need the posters or the policies or the reminders. The lesson had moved inside her, settled somewhere steady. One afternoon, while unpacking the last box in their new apartment, Annie found an old drawing, the one with people holding hands around a tall building. She studied it for a long time. Then she turned it over and drew something new on the back. A road, people walking in different directions. Some stopping, some turning back, some helping each other up. Rose watched from the doorway. "That's different," she said. Annie nodded. "It's what happens after." At school, Annie's new teacher asked the class to write about someone they admired. Annie thought about it carefully. She didn't write about the billionaire. She didn't write about herself. She didn't even write about her mother, though she wanted to. She wrote about people who stopped, a teacher who admitted she was wrong, a classmate who shared crayons, a stranger who asked a question instead of giving an order. When the paper came back, there was a note at the bottom. "You notice the quiet kind of courage. That's rare." Annie smiled. One evening, Rose came home excited, breathless in a way Annie hadn't seen before. "I got promoted," Rose said. Annie blinked. "At the new job?" Rose nodded. "They asked me." Annie grinned. "Of course they did." Rose laughed, then suddenly cried. Years of being unseen poured out all at once. Annie hugged her tightly. "You always mattered," she said. Rose held her daughter and nodded. "I know that now." The last message from the billionaire came on an ordinary Tuesday. He was stepping down. The board had voted unanimously. A successor had been chosen with care. "I wanted you to hear it from me," he said. Annie listened quietly. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Yes," he admitted. "But it's the right kind." Annie nodded. "That means you're paying attention." He smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Thank you," he said. "For everything." Annie thought for a moment. "Just keep reading," she said. He laughed. "I will." The call ended. That night, Annie lay awake thinking about how strange it was that something so big had started with something so small. A piece of paper, a feeling, a pause. She didn't feel proud. She felt complete. Somewhere in the city, lights flickered on and off. People hurried. Decisions were made too fast and too slow. Mistakes still happened, but Annie knew something now that no one could take away. That even when the world didn't change all at once, it shifted in increments. That attention left marks. That courage could be quiet and still be powerful. She rolled onto her side and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be another ordinary day. And that, she understood, was the victory. The last thing Annie learned was that justice rarely arrived the way people expected. It didn't always come with handcuffs or headlines. It didn't always look like victory. More often, it arrived as quiet alignment, the moment when what was right finally matched what was real. The day it happened, Annie didn't know it was important. She woke up late, sunlight already filling the room of their new apartment. The city outside sounded different here, less urgent, more human. She dressed slowly, choosing her favorite sweater, the one Rose said made her look older than she was. "Breakfast is almost ready," Rose called from the kitchen. Annie sat at the table, feet swinging, watching her mother move with a confidence that still felt new. Rose no longer apologized for space, no longer flinched when people looked at her too closely. The world hadn't become kinder, but she had become steadier. After breakfast, Annie walked to school alone for the first time. Rose watched from the doorway, heart tight but proud. "Call me when you get there," she said. "I will," Annie replied. Already halfway down the steps, the walk was short. Familiar now. Annie crossed the street carefully, waited for the light even when no cars were coming. She wasn't afraid. She was deliberate. At school, the day passed like any other. Reading, math, recess, laughter. Small arguments that ended quickly. Nothing dramatic happened. And that, Annie realized later, was the point. That afternoon, the class was asked to clean out their desks before the end of term. Papers piled up, old drawings, half-finished worksheets. Annie found a folded page at the bottom of her desk. Her handwriting, uneven but certain. "If something feels wrong, stop. If you're scared, look closer. If someone rushes you, slow down." She smiled and tucked it into her backpack. After school, Annie walked home alone again. The air was warm. A neighbor waved. A dog barked behind a fence. Ordinary life, moving steadily forward. Rose was on the phone when Annie arrived, voice low but excited. "Yes," Rose said. "I understand. Thank you." She hung up and looked at Annie, eyes shining. "That was my supervisor," she said. "They're offering me a leadership role. Full-time, with benefits." Annie grinned. "You're ready." Rose laughed, then grew quiet. "I didn't think they'd ever see me." Annie set her backpack down. "They always could," she said. "They just didn't read carefully." Rose pulled her into a hug, holding her longer than usual. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls gold, Annie sat on the floor drawing one last picture. Not of buildings, not of papers, not of boardrooms. She drew people sitting at tables, talking, some listening, some thinking, some changing their minds. Above them, she wrote a single sentence: "Pay attention." Later, Annie lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of her mother moving through the apartment. Dishes, footsteps, the quiet rhythm of safety. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from the billionaire, the last one. He had officially left the company that morning. The transition was complete. The new leadership had reaffirmed every reform, every policy, every cultural shift. I wanted you to know. The message ended. The system no longer depends on one person.
Take care of each other.
That was the goal. Eyes. Annie stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she typed back, slowly, carefully. Good. Systems shouldn't need heroes. She set the phone aside and closed her eyes. Images drifted through her mind, not as memories, but as understanding. The moment she'd felt something was wrong. The moment she'd spoken. The moment an adult had finally listened. She realized something then, lying in the dark. She didn't feel responsible anymore. She felt released, because the lesson had done what lessons were meant to do. It had moved outward, taken root, become shared. Annie slept deeply. Years later, people would try to tell the story differently. They would say it was about a genius child, about a fallen executive, about luck or coincidence or timing. They would miss the point. The truth was simpler. A little girl noticed something. She wasn't powerful. She wasn't protected. She wasn't supposed to matter, but she stopped anyway. And because she did, a system slowed down long enough to see itself clearly, and chose, finally, to change. Annie never thought of herself as brave. She thought of herself as careful, and in a world that rushed past consequences, that kind of care turned out to be revolutionary. On her desk, beside her bed, Annie kept the old piece of paper folded neatly, not as a reminder of what she had done, but of what anyone could do. Notice, pause, read again. That was the legacy. Not money, not recognition, not even justice in the dramatic sense, but a quieter, sturdier truth. That even the smallest voice, when it refuses to rush, can change the direction of things that once felt untouchable. And that was enough. The story teaches that true power does not come from titles, wealth, or authority, but from attention, courage, and integrity. It reminds us that many injustices survive not because people are evil, but because they rush, look away, or assume someone else will speak up. Through Annie, the story shows that even the smallest voice can change the course of powerful systems when it dares to pause and tell the truth. The lesson for the audience is clear. Slowing down, reading carefully, and listening especially to those society overlooks can prevent harm, restore dignity, and quietly bring justice where noise and force often fail. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.